Assalamu alaikum, Sister Aisha.
Walaikum salam. I am just putting that YouTube up.
Yeah. I just have a question regarding the past class that we
Sure.
did.
Yep.
And I have two questions actually, but I can't remember the second one. Hopefully I remember sometime soon. And this one I just remembered as well. So we did a class, I think it's been a while, about reciting after reciting the Fatiha, and then we recite any surah to pray.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
you mentioned that it's okay to recite any verse of the Quran, but it's not really advisable to like combine different surahs from different chapters of the Quran. So like we should
No,
just read.
not advisable to combine different chapters. There's nothing wrong with combining different chapters. It's that scholars dislike that, let's say you're reading from one spot to go back in the Quran. Like let's say you're reading Surah An-Nas, Surah An-Nas, you're gonna go back. Let's say you're reading Surah Al-Kafirun, okay? Now that's
Mm.
the end of the chapters, okay? To then right after Surah Al-Kafirun, probably start reading maybe, I don't know, Surah Al-Baqarah. So they
Oh,
call
okay.
that tankis. So they
Okay.
wanted you to be in order from Al-Fatiha, Al-Baqarah, Ali Imran, Al-Nisa, all that, all the way up until Surah An-Nas. Okay, that's what they preferred, but not necessarily that it invalidates your prayer. It doesn't invalidate your prayer per se, but it's just makruh. And you can read multiple chapters slash multiple surahs in one rak'ah. Absolutely nothing wrong with that.
That's clearly understood now.
All right, dear. So,
Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be doing Surah al-Duha. Oh, sorry, Salat al-Duha, Surah al-Duha. Salat al-Duha. And with Salat al-Duha, of course, there are a number of different issues to talk about. Let's see with Salat al-Duha. And what is Salat al-Duha? So Salat al-Duha is basically one of those salawat that are non-obligatory salawat. So before, let's look into what we did before. So before we did the different salawat that are tatawwu'. Tatawwu' actually means something that is voluntary and not obligatory. So then we went into what is called the Sunan al-Ratiba, and we said the Sunan al-Ratiba are basically the Sunan, the different prayers that you would pray after the obligatory prayer or before. So if you're talking about the 2 rak'ahs before Fajr, that's a Sunnah Ratiba. And if you're That's called a Sunnah Ratiba. So we know that the Sunnah Ratiba, you've got 2 rak'ahs or four after and four before. So two after or two before, or four after and four before. That's basically considered Sunnah Ratiba. Sunnah Ratiba. Two after Maghrib, two after Isha. هات لي بلوزة. Two after Isha and two before Fajr. And we talked about how to pray those, basically just like you would pray those salawat that you would normally pray. And just keep that one in mind. But we more focused on the timing. We more focused on the importance of the Sunan al-Rawatib than anything else, because of course many will be asking different questions in regards to Salat Sunan al-Ratiba. As for Salat al-Duha, Salat al-Duha, it's not one of those Sunan al-Rawatib. So now we're going into something that is a Sunnah, but not necessarily within the Sunan al-Rawatib. It's still not obligatory. It's still the voluntary ones. And Salat al-Duha, let's see what some of the hadith that relate to Salat al-Duha. Let's look at this hadith. This hadith is actually in both Sahih Muslim and Sahih al-Bukhari, which really marks an important hadith in regards to Salat al-Duha, and it is actually probably one of the most authentic ahadith in regards to salat al-duha. Let's see this hadith. أوصاني خليلي بصيام 3 أيام من كل شهر وركعتي الضحى وأن أوتر قبل أن أرقد. He said, my friend, I want you to look at that one. That was basically Abu Huraira talking about the Prophet ﷺ. He said, my friend advised me to do 3 things, and I shall not leave them until I die. And they are: 1, to fast 3 days every month, to perform duha, and to perform the witr before sleeping. This is probably one of the most authentic hadith, like I said. Let's see, when he says awsani khalili. Now, one thing is that the word khalili, okay, it may seem like it's talking about Khalili from the city Hebron, the original city that I come from, but no, this is not talking about that. This is talking about my friend, my dear friend. So that therefore the Prophet ﷺ was basically telling Abu Huraira of something that is very important to be consistent of: fasting 3 days of every month, fasting 2 rak'ahs of duha, 2 rak'ahs of duha. Let's see, did he actually, he said perform duha? He actually, the wording in the Lugha Arabiya, it actually said rak'atay duha, the 2 rak'ahs of duha, and an utira qabla an arqud, and for me to pray the witr before going to sleep. We did actually talk about salat al-witr. We talked about salat al-witr being an even number: 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, or 13. Okay. Let's look at the other hadith. In the other hadith, that the Prophet ﷺ used to pray al-duha to the point that the ones that were observing him, they used to think that he was never leaving salat al-duha. And at times he would be not praying salat al-duha to the point that they would actually think he will never perform it again. So he wasn't necessarily consistent with it, but he would sometimes pray it like it's a very important thing, and other times he will not be as consistent with it. Let's look at this, the numbering. So when you look at this one, it was really straightforward in telling us that Salat al-Duha is 2 rak'ahs. But then, what about other ahadith that relate to it? Let's look at this one. There is a hadith, Anas: whoever sits in his own place of prayer after Fajr and then would continue to do the tasbih during the 2 rak'ahs of duha, and they would continue to say لا يقول إلا خيرا, only good things, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would forgive his sins even if the sins were as the foam of the sea. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at a certain timing, that if you were to pray Fajr, and you would not get up after praying Fajr. In other words, you would sit on that prayer mat. You would, or it doesn't have to be, literally sitting on the prayer mat, but we're talking about not getting up for other chores, not scrolling probably on your phone, or probably, talking about something else, or probably doing laundry or whatever it is that you might be getting busy with in morning. But no, this person, they prayed their Fajr, they stayed sitting down, doing their tasbih, probably doing Quran, probably doing dhikr, up until the sun had risen past the time of hated timing. Now, this is important: past the time that it was hated to pray in. So and they would continue to do tasbih. It's okay for me to do tasbih while the sun is actually rising. In other words, during the time when the Prophet ﷺ said that it would rise between the horns of shaitan? The answer is yes. That's permissible to do that tasbih and that dhikr during that time. Nothing wrong with it. And then if you continue until past that time, then you pray 2 rak'ahs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive you your sins even if they were as abundant as the foam on the sea. What foam on the sea? Is there any foam on the sea? Remember when the sea would basically make the waves after the waves sometimes what would develop as a result of those waves is basically a foamy thing over the shore. That's basically what it's talking about. In other words, even if it's so much, I don't know why, the hadith, it's quite interesting why the hadith, when it wants to talk about something abundant, it would give, I guess, the simile and this comparison with the foam on the foam on the sea. Well, that's the same way that it described when the Prophet ﷺ had said that the Muslims were in large numbers, but they were basically small in their influence, small in their power, and he also described them as abundant as the foam, as the sea, in their influence. It's quite interesting. I don't really know the answer to that, but it's quite interesting. Maybe we could all research to see why the foam on the sea is used and not possibly maybe, I don't know, the number of pieces on the sand, maybe, or maybe the rocks or whatever, but why the foam on the sea? Okay, let's see. The most numbers that you could pray duha in is 8 rak'ahs max. Okay. And Sayyidah Aisha had said that the Prophet ﷺ, let's see, this hadith is in Sahih Muslim, that the Prophet ﷺ, the maximum he used to pray duha in, she said 4 rak'ahs, and he would add as much as he wanted. Okay. As much as he wanted. So is that talking about, and there's another hadith, Hani. Who's Hani? Hani is the Prophet ﷺ's cousin. Guess what? The Prophet ﷺ asked for her hand in marriage and she refused. She refused. Why would she refuse? She refused, and even though she's the Prophet ﷺ's cousin, Hani is basically bint Abu Talib. Okay. She refused because she had orphan children to take care of, and she felt that with the orphan children to take care of, and if the Prophet ﷺ was going to be her husband, that it was going to be too much of responsibility for her to handle. So she preferred basically to just stay consistent with one responsibility, which is all these orphan kids that she wasn't keeping, well, she wasn't able to, I guess, keep up with everything. So she was like, it's a enough already on my plate. I wouldn't want to be accountable for perhaps not being consistent with the responsibility that I would, after being married to the Prophet ﷺ, and I wouldn't probably be capable of being good enough or possibly doing everything that I should be doing and be held accountable for it. So I'll just make sure that I'll stick to these chores and refuse the proposal that the Prophet ﷺ had proposed to. Okay, let's see. She had narrated this hadith that the Prophet ﷺ had prayed 8 rak'ahs subhat al-duha. Subhat al-duha meaning sunnat al-duha. Okay, and you could see this hadith. It said rawahu al-jama'a, which actually means it was narrated by Bukhari, it was narrated by Muslim, and you could see the other narrators as well. So this hadith is also giving us at least the number of it. So in addition to that hadith, that Abu Hurairah had said, Awsani Khalili bithalath, and basically one of them mentioned Salat al-Duha. That's also a hadith that was narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, and so is this one. This one, I don't think it was narrated by Bukhari and Muslim. Let's see, it was narrated by Muslim. Okay, so this hadith that was narrated by Sayyidah Aisha, the Prophet ﷺ used to pray 4 rak'ahs and add as much as he can, or as much as he wanted to. That was narrated by Muslim. Okay, so when is the timing for Salat al-Duha anyways? The timing is when the sun would basically rise past the time that it would be makruh to pray in. and it would continue until the sun is not in the middle of the sky. Wait a minute. So how do I know if the sun is actually in the middle of the sky or not? I mean, do I like go out and just see, trying to figure out what middle of the sky is? No, this is how you would do it. You would basically, here we go. Okay, hold on. We're gonna do a better art than this. Just give me time. There's hope that one day I'd probably pass the art class. Let me tell you a very sad thing about me. Okay. I was so bad in art. I mean, so bad in art that I used to give my sister to do the art on my behalf because I was an A student in everything, but a complete failure in art. Okay. So in order for me to not affect my grades, I would give my sister to do the art for me because I wanted to make sure that my overall grades were not that bad. Don't tell my previous teachers, okay? Okay, so right now, here we go. Now, when the sun is in the middle of the sky, oh, just give me a second, please, of an important phone call came in. All right. So how do I know if the sun is in the middle of the sky? You would basically look at the shadow. Okay. If the shadow is the same size or at least starting to make a size, okay. If the shadow is starting to make the size of this person, you're starting to see a shadow, that actually means that the sun is not in the middle of the sky. Okay. If the sun is in the middle of the sky, our little guy right here would have no shadow. Okay, or you might actually see maybe just the shadow of his head, but yes, there would be no shadow. That's when you know that the sun is in the middle of the sky. So to have to go out to see that, no, you could use a tree. You could use whatever's outside your core, whatever it is that's outside. Just say if there's no shadow, that means you're if there's no shadow, that means it's the time that is considered as the end time for salat al-duha. Means it's the end time for salat al-duha. Uh, who wants to tell on me? Okay, Aminata, she's gonna tell on me to my teachers. That's gonna be affecting my grade. All right. Inshallah. Okay, there we go. Somebody's gonna tell on me. Okay, I'm in trouble here. All right, let's see. Now when you look at the time, so that would be the end of the timing, but in terms of the timing for the beginning of Salat al-Duha, you're basically looking at the time when it is basically past when the sun is beyond sunrise by almost, I don't know, almost half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour. That's when the sun is up past the hated time. Okay. All right. So let's go and basically clear all of that and go for any questions about Salat al-Duha before we pass that one? No? No one has any questions?
I have a quick question, Dr. Aisha.
Go ahead. Oh, wait a minute. You're
Even though
gonna
I'm
tell
going
on
to
me.
tell on you, but it's like, please answer
Go
my
ahead, dear.
question,
Just gotta
even
make
though
sure
I'm
I
going to
pass
tell
those
on you.
classes.
So for the prayer, like when you are at work and you really need to do the prayer, I like sometimes just do 2 rakah. Is that okay?
That's okay. Remember, you could do for Salat al-Duha, the
The,
least is 2 rakahs. You can do 4, and you would do them in twos, by the way. Maybe I forgot to mention that one. You would do it in twos, not in a set of 8 or a set of 4. You would basically do it in twos, 2 rakahs, 2 by 2, basically. And you could do it to the max of 8. Can I read holding the Quran? That was always probably the question that people would ask. The answer is certainly you can hold the Quran and you can read by holding the Quran. That's absolutely fine. Okay.
thank you.
And you can
Question.
go ahead.
So if I miss like Qiyam al-Layl and I want to do duha. Can I do it like if like I do like a hundred ayahs or 1,000 ayahs? Will that be considered like when you do qiyam al-layl like al-qanitin or something like that?
So it wouldn't be considered as Qiyam al-Layl, okay? Because every single prayer, let's say it has its own secret. When we say it has its own secret, it has its own impact on you, has its own inspiration, it has its own power. Let's use that one. It has its own power, okay? It wouldn't be equivalent to Qiyam al-Layl, but can you actually do that to make up at least for Qiyam al-Layl? You certainly can do that to make up for Qiyam al-Layl. And any prayer, the longer you stay standing in it, that would basically be, let's say, the more rewarding and the more powerful. Okay, the longer you stay. And let's say you couldn't stay standing, you probably had back pains, etc., but you wanted to do it sitting down. That's absolutely fine. You don't have to have a reason, okay? Even if I'm not necessarily in pain. I mean, I just did a ton of dishes a few minutes ago, but I just want to be comfortable and I don't necessarily have a medical reason to why I need to sit down, but I just want to sit down just to make myself comfortable. And as I'm sitting down, right there, instead of probably scrolling on my phone, I'm just doing a couple rak'ahs, just sitting down, etc. That's absolutely permissible. And for the voluntary prayers, you do not have to have a reason to sit down. For a voluntary prayer, you do not have to have a reason to sit down. You can just sit down just for, I guess, the comfort of it. That's absolutely fine. This is also another common question. All the voluntary prayers, you can just sit down if you wanted to, and even if you didn't necessarily have a reason. Okay, let's look at this hadith. صلاة الأوابين حين ترمض الفصال. صلاة الأوابين حين ترمض الفصال. So what does that mean? So صلاة الأوابين would be when ترمض الفصال is basically speaking about when the sun basically gets hot. That's just timing for صلاة الأوابين. When you say ترمض الفصال, during sunrise, when the sun rises, this is generally when the sun rises, like after it goes past that time of makruh, that's when the sun, you would feel like there's no air moving and it gets stronger. That's when the sun is really strong and really heated. And really hot during that time. Unlike, for example, you compare it to the timing for dhuhr, although it would be extremely hot, but the type of heat is actually different. For those that would go out, you would realize that the type of heat during that time is different. But anyhow, I guess it's more the areas. Minnesotans, you're not included to test for this because unfortunately, you guys are living in an area that is completely different from areas like Minnesota, Malaysia, and all of those. I really pity you, people of Minnesota. That's all right. Maybe one day you'll get to see a beautiful weather like Malaysian weather. That's all right. We really pity you. Okay, let's see. I guess it's probably giving me comfort that I didn't miss much about Minnesota. So yes, ladies, let's
May I
just
say something? Mm,
go ahead, dear.
I had heard somewhere that reading duha is also when the sun, when the camel's baby's feet gets hot with the sun.
So that is actually one interpretation for tarmidul fisal.
Okay.
Okay. That is one interpretation. And they really went in lots of debate about Tarmidul Fasad. I just made the story short because believe it or not, the Salat al-Awabin, all right, there was even a debate, since you opened up the subject. I didn't want to go into it, but you had a debate whether Salat al-Awabin is near Maghrib time or around Maghrib time, or whether it is Salat al-Duha, and what is Tarmud al-Fisal? Is it when the sun, or the sun basically gets heated, or is it when the camel basically, just the amount of time that the camel nurses in, or the camel basically keeps its feet in the sand or whatever. So you had these huge debates on what really that prayer is and what timing that is. And Salat al-Awabin, is it the same as Salat al-Duha or not? That's also part of the debate. But because I promised to make the class summarized and not too detailed in the differences of opinions, I basically wanted to just I guess get to the point rather than get to that differences of opinions. But what you're talking about is basically that wording, Tarmidul Fisal, and that debate about that interpretation.
Sorry, I'm really sorry.
That's all right. That you actually did an outstanding job. It's just that I didn't want to go into those debates because I didn't want to confuse the sisters.
Actually, you're saying is a much wider window, which is better, easier. Not better, but easier.
Right. I would love to go in lots of details, but like I said, I promised to make it short. But I guess since you asked Salat al-Awabin and Tarmud al-Fisal and what that means, I hope I explained it.
Thank you. Yes.
Allah يبارك فيكي. Let's go for sujood al-tilawa. Okay, sujood al-tilawa. Remember when maybe we could, what do we have here? Oh no, let's see if I could have the Quran right there. Okay, we've got the Quran and we can probably show you that sujood al-tilawa and what it would look like on the copy of the Quran for us to actually see, right? Let's see when it opens up, and we're going to go to a couple surahs right there and actually see sujood al-tilawa and what that would look like. Okay, the easiest thing to spot is for everyone basically Surah al-Alaq. Okay, that one everybody is always asking about for some reason. Even though, look at it right here, here's a sujood right there. Okay, وَإِذَا قُرِئَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقُرْآنُ لَا يَسْجُدُونَ, and they would give you this shrine looking thing, and right on the side they would tell you this is a place of sajda. Many would think this is an underline, but this is actually an upper line. So the upper line is to indicate why and where that imperative verb giving us the order for sujood is at. And the shrine is telling us this is where you want to do your sujood. Okay, there are 15 sajdat tilawa in the Quran. Right in Juzu Amma, we just saw one right there. There's another one in Surah Al-Alaq, and you would see right there again. Remember, this is an upper line, not a lower line. Okay, not an underline, but an upper line. Okay, so now that you get to see what a sajda would look like and what does that mean, how do we actually do it, like during salah, and how do we do it outside of salah? But before we answer these questions, let's get to some of those important issues. Sujood al-tilawa, there are certain, it's a sunnah, that's number one. Okay, and the reason for sujood al-tilawa, the word tilawa actually means recitation. The word sujood actually means prostration. That's when you put all the way down for your sujood, when you put your head down on the floor. That's basically the sujood and not the ruku'ah. Okay, so when you're looking at sujood al-tilawa, you're looking at something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically permitted, and the Prophet ﷺ had basically taught us to do that sujood tilawa. So whether we're reading the ayat or whether we're listening to it, it's basically the sunnah to do this sujood. And why are we doing it? To get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And certainly it's in order to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is a sunnah to do sujood tilawa for both a person that is listening though and a person that is the person that is listening to it and the person that is reading it, they both basically can do sujood tilawa. And this is a unanimous agreement between scholars that there was a unanimous agreement between scholars that it is permissible. Let's see the hadith that basically say that the Prophet ﷺ was doing it. In other words, looking at the sunnah. Ibn Umar ibn al-Khattab said, كان النبي يقرأ علينا السورة فيها السجدة فيسجد ونسجد معه حتى ما يجد أحدنا موضعا لجبهته. Let's see this hadith that is basically agreed upon and related by Bukhari and Muslim, telling us that this hadith is highly authentic. Let's see, Ibn Umar, that is Abdullah ibn Umar, he said the Prophet ﷺ used to read the surah that contained a sajda, and he would make the sujood, and we would make the sujood along with him, to the point that sometimes we would not find a place for our foreheads to basically find in order to prostrate. And let's see, Ibn al-Qayyim, so this is the hadith right there, and basically the hadith that I just read. Ibn al-Qayyim, who's Ibn al-Qayyim? Just an idea about Ibn al-Qayyim. Ibn al-Qayyim was originally from Nablus, from Palestine, okay? And Ibn al-Qayyim later fled the war from Palestine, basically, and then stayed living in Syria. By the way, a lot of the people living in Syria actually originally come from Lebanon or perhaps even Palestine. So you would see a lot of that. And even in Palestine, we have some families that are Syrian origin. So they would, we would see a family called possibly like a Tahan, Saman, or even different families that are in Palestine originally come from Syria. We know that as a fact. They know that. And we even in Palestine, we have families that come from India, Kashmir. They're actually called the Kashmiri family. We have families that are called Afghani family, Uzbek family. We have families that are that also come from areas. They're called the Mamluk family. So originally from Mongolia. We have families that are originally from India. We have families that are originally from Albania, like the what family is that? That's a very famous family. Forgot what, oh my God, I can't believe I forgot their name. No, not al-Bugha. What is that family? Oh, I can't remember it right now, but it's a very famous family in Syria and also in Palestine and also in Lebanon. They basically are originally from Albania. Okay, let's continue right there. So Ibn al-Qayyim basically was also the student of Ibn Taymiyyah. Okay, let's see. He said the times of sajdat, the places of sujood that we would do, are basically looking at the different orders, or even sometimes the different information that can later tell us, well, everything is doing that prostration, you do the same. It can sometimes be in a form of an imperative verb ordering you for sujood, or sometimes it can be in a form of an informative verb of telling you that is telling you that everything is doing sujood, so do that as well. And basically you would see sometimes the ayat would tell you that everyone and everything is doing sujood, and therefore you engage in that sajda as well, whether you're reciting it yourself or whether you're hearing that sujood. that information or that order for sujood, then you would get engaged in that as well. The ayat that order for sujood are more incumbent to practice sujood in. Why? Because then it would be giving you the order. But the ayat they're informing of others doing sujood, whether the creatures, whether the skies, whether different things are doing sujood, that it would be recommended. But the ones that are giving you an imperative verb, fasjud waqtarib, you do the sujood. So that would be a guess of a higher command. Layla, go ahead, dear.
I think you answered my question. So if someone is reciting sujood tilawa and it doesn't do the sujood, you still do it because you hear it?
So yes, if you're hearing it, you can do sujood tilawa. Sujood tilawa is more, or let's say is of a higher recommendation and a higher obligation on the people on the person that is reciting it, more than the person that is hearing it. But the person that is hearing it can do it as well. Okay?
Okay, jazakallah khair.
All right, let's
Sorry,
continue.
Sheikh, can I ask quickly as well? And I don't know if you're gonna cover it. So when you're
Yeah, we're
reciting,
going to cover everything about sujood tilawa. So how
okay,
about we just delay the questions at the end, because we're going to take it one at a time, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions. All right, let's do that. That way we won't keep on jumping from one topic to another. Okay, let's see. Abu Hurairah had said, إِذَا قَرَأَ ابْنُ آدَمَ. But I want you to look at this word. This word says that it is marfu'. When it says that it is marfu', that is basically to tell us that Abu Hurairah didn't say this quote from his own self, but he was basically referring it to something that the Prophet ﷺ had taught him, or that the Prophet ﷺ himself had said. إذا قرأ ابن آدم السجدة فسجد اعتزل الشيطان يبكي يقول يا ويله أمر ابن آدم بالسجود فسجد فله الجنة وأمرت بالسجود فأبيت فلي النار. Narrated by Muslim, that when the son of Adam recites a verse of prostration and then falls down in prostration, Shaitan goes into seclusion, weeping and saying, "Woe unto me, the son of Adam is commanded to prostrate, and he prostrated. So paradise is entitled to them. And when I was commanded to prostrate, but I had refused, so I am doomed to hell." Okay. So that's basically to tell us that for those that would do sujood, that's basically right there putting the shaitan that surrounds you, basically putting them down and you overcoming their power. And at the same time, it's basically falahul jannah, as a witness from shaitan. He recognizes that your sujood is gonna entitle you to jannah. Okay, let's see. Sujood tilawa is a sunnah for both the person that is reading and the person that is listening, and certainly, especially if the person had been wanting to listen to it. So let's say I'm listening maybe on the phone or probably listening on a YouTube video. Do I do sujood? You can do sujood. It's not necessarily obligatory, but it's a sunnah. Remember, it's a sunnah. So I don't want you to feel like, okay, what if I miss out? What if this? You want it, you heard the ayat sajda, you can do that sujood. It's not obligatory, but it's a sunnah. Can you make it up? You can make it up if we're not talking about, a long time had passed. You can make it up. The Prophet ﷺ used to read, just like in this hadith ibn Umar ibn al-Khattab, he said the Prophet ﷺ would read the surah that has a sajda, and they would all prostrate together. So that would prove that the person hearing the recitation could also do the sajda. Like I said, if you're listening to a YouTube video that basically was reading that ayah, should you pause it and do the sujood? That's a good thing. You could do that, but if you didn't, you will not be held accountable. What if I wanted to do sujood, okay, but I was probably driving in my car, couldn't stop the car to do the sujood, and I I wasn't able to basically be in a place of sujood. Can I do like a tasbih? You can do like a tasbih, or you could do, let's say, at least a gesture of sujood, because you're probably not capable of stopping the core. You could do a gesture of sujood, but of course, if it's dangerous, you don't have to do sujood. It's a sunnah anyways. Okay, it's a sunnah anyways. Let's say, in general, there is, let's see, he said, أما السامع وهو الذي لم يقصد الاستماع. As for the person that was hearing, well, they were overhearing it, but they weren't really tentative in their listening, then in that situation, it wouldn't be something that they would be doing sujood for, because they didn't even hear it. They didn't even recognize that. Okay, let's see. When there was a story, let's look at this. Al-Bukhari had mentioned a story that Uthman ibn Affan, he passed by a person that was, I guess, engaging in something else, and then Uthman ibn Affan read read an ayah that contained a sajda, and basically he was reading, well, who was reading that surah? He basically passed by Uthman bin Affan, and Uthman bin Affan was probably engaged with something else, but he read an ayah that has a sajda just to provoke Uthman bin Affan to do that sajda, but Uthman bin Affan did not do the sujood, and then he asked him and inquired, why didn't you do the sujood? And he said, a sajda is basically a commandment on those that are hearing it. In other words, tentatively listening or reciting it, and not a person that is probably not paying attention while this is being recited. So you're probably, I don't know, perhaps not being tentative to the listening. Someone else is reading, probably in the masjid, okay, and probably you're reading it in a loud voice, and then they came across this sajda, and they made sujood tilawa, but you were just passing by the masjid. You weren't really tentatively listening, but you overheard that he had read an ayah that has a sajda. Does that mean that you have to do the sajda? The answer is no. It, just like Uthman bin Affan, he passed by and he said it would be a commandment upon those that were tentatively listening or reading it tentatively. Okay, how many sajdas are there in the Quran? There are almost 15. Let's see, in Surah Al-A'raf, Al-Ra'd, Al-Nahl, Al-Isra, Maryam. Al-Hajj actually has 2. Al-Furqan and Naml. So those are basically, how do we look at that one? So you would say, basically telling us Alif Lam Mim Tanzil. So we're talking about Surah Al-Sajda and Al-Najm, Al-Inshiqaq, and Surah Al-Alaq. Okay, in Surah Sad, there are differences of opinions between scholars, whether that is an actual sajda or whether that's a sajda shukr and not necessarily the sujood tilawa. Okay, so that's that debate. Just keep in mind about those. So let's say if a person wanted to do sujood tilawa, how would they do it? So they would basically say Allahu Akbar, and then basically go for the sujood. That's basically it. What's the evidence on that? There's a hadith Ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Umar, that the Prophet ﷺ كان عليه الصلاة والسلام يقرأ علينا القرآن فإذا مر بالسجدة كبر وسجد وسجدنا معه. And let's look at this hadith. Oh, this one's the hadith about Uthman. Let's see the hadith. I want you to see what we're doing. Okay, let's see. This is it. Yes, this is it. So Allah's Messenger used to recite the Quran to us, and whenever he recited a verse that contained a prostration, he used to say takbir, that is Allahu Akbar, and do the prostration and the prostration, and they would all basically prostrate with the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, let's see right there. What do they say in their sujood? They would say Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, just like you would say in the sujood during Salah. If you wanted to add سجد وجهي للذي خلقه وصوره وشق سمعه وبصره بحوله وقوته اللهم اكتب لي بها أجر وضع عني بها وزر واجعلها لي عندك ذخرا وتقبلها مني كما تقبلتها من عبدك داود, then there's nothing wrong. You could say that. Let's say what that means. My face has prostrated before Allah who created and fashioned it, creating in it hearing and vision by his power and might. O Allah, reward me for the action of prostration, remove sins from me, reserve it for me, and accept it from me as you did with your servant Dawood. And basically, it would be that it will be acceptable. And okay, can I do it in English? You can make the dua in English. Can I read it off my phone, for example? I don't know how you're going to be reading it off your phone while you're doing your sujood, but if you probably wanted to do maybe a body gesture of sujood and not necessarily kneeling all the way down and saying that, that's also permissible as well. Okay. Can I do that sujood tilawa? Can I do that sujood tilawa without tahara? That's the most common question that people ask. Do I have to wear hijab for sujood tilawa? That's another common question that people ask. Let's answer it then. Okay. There are differences of opinions between scholars. Pay attention to this one. I'm going to make the story a little detailed / short. Okay. So the debate between scholars is, number one, the differences of opinions that yes, you can make sujood tilawa with tahara and without tahara. Number two, you can make sujood tilawa even if you were probably, when you say without tahara, that actually would mean even if you had your period, okay? And do you have to have hijab on? In other words, the proper clothes on? Do you not have to? Can you not have to, etc.? The debate between scholars is a huge debate, okay, in regards to sujood tilawa and the requirements for sujood tilawa. The scholars that regarded it as a prayer, they considered that you have to have wudu, you have to face the qibla, and you have to have hijab on, and you basically have to consider all the different rulings that you would consider as a prayer. Okay? Those are the scholars that basically said that it's a type of salah, therefore there are different requirements that are for salah, in facing the qibla, etc., all of that, then that would basically apply here. The scholars that said it was not a part of salah and that it was a sujood and not necessarily a salah, just like Ibn Hazm, they regarded that you can actually do it when you don't have wudu, when you are not facing qibla, when you don't necessarily have to have your hijab on, and in fact considered that you can probably even be on your period and actually do sujood tilawa. Those are the scholars that considered that it's not a prayer, and meaning having the same prerequisites for salah, and considered therefore the prerequisites for salah do not apply here. Okay, so just letting you know the differences of opinions. What is the preponderant? Wallahu a'lam. It is not part of the salawat, even though there is the takbir in the beginning, but you could say that it's just one piece of salah, one piece of what would be in salah, but not necessarily everything that is in salah. So therefore, wallahu a'lam, the preponderant is that it is not necessarily obligatory to face the qibla, to have your hijab on, to have basically wudu, and that you could do it. What's the evidence? If you wanted to say that is the preponderant, you have to have some supporting evidence. Well, if you look at this supporting evidence, the supporting evidence is really this hadith that Ibn Umar had mentioned. And we had seen it before in the beginning. Let's say, where is it? It's basically this hadith that is muttafaq alayh. You could say this hadith is agreed upon between Bukhari and Muslim, that it's highly authentic. When you look at this quote, that the Prophet ﷺ used to read Surah As-Sajda, and then they would all recite, well, they would all prostrate along with him. This is the hadith right there. Okay, they would all prostrate with him. And even though the Prophet ﷺ, when you would see that Ibn Umar said we would not find even a place, we would struggle to find a spot for our foreheads to prostrate in, that tells us that everybody else was doing it. The Prophet ﷺ didn't ask them whether they were on tahara, what state of tahara they were in, whether they needed to make wudu or not. They just all were listening to this. It was spontaneous, and they would just recite. He would recite, and they would make sujood along with him. So it was just a spontaneous thing. It wasn't pre-planned. Here's what you need to do. And we already know that a person that is hearing the Quran, they're not required to have tahara. Okay, so, and you could say that it wasn't necessarily telling us that they were facing the Qibla, etc. So that's to give us a strong, I guess, indication that the prerequisites for Salat don't apply here, and therefore it's permissible to not have wudu and not face the Qibla and still do sujood tilawa. Okay. For sujood tilawa, is it best if I were to do that Allahu Akbar while standing and then going for sujood? Or can I'm sitting down and just say Allahu Akbar while I'm sitting down and just go for sujood? Standing up and then doing Allahu Akbar and then going for sujood is actually better than just saying Allahu Akbar and doing sujood while you're sitting down. Standing up, doing that Allahu Akbar, that takbir, and then going for sujood is basically more honorable. Okay, so now we end up with basically coming to the end of sujood tilawa. We're still going to continue, okay, for tatawwa al-mutlaq, but if there are any questions about sujood tilawa, now is the time to ask. I believe, what's her name? Zuhriya, I think you had some questions, but I hope I answered them.
Yeah. Yes, I was wondering if you were reciting the Quran and it's around the time when you
Right.
not to
Yeah,
pray.
I don't know why I skipped that. That's a good one. So if you're in the middle of this, in the middle of Salah, okay? If you're in the middle of Salah and you happen to read a surah, or basically ayat that have sajdat tilawa, all you need to do is basically go for sujood tilawa even during salah, and just say Allahu Akbar, go for sujood tilawa, do sujood tilawa, and basically continue your recitation. Get up and continue that recitation. Don't go for ruku right after it. No, read something, continue recitation in order to distinguish between the sujood and also the recitation, and therefore go for more recitation after sujood tilawa, and then go for your ruku'. Okay?
Like when the sun is rising, when we're not allowed to pray,
Well,
but you
anyways, you're
happen to
not
be
allowed to
reciting
pray
Quran.
while. Oh, you mean can you do sujood tilawa
Yes. Yeah.
during while the sun is rising?
Yes.
So for the scholars that said that the rulings of Salah applied, they considered that you cannot pray during that time, therefore considered you cannot do that sujood tilawa at that time. The scholars that considered that the rulings of prayer do not apply considered that you can actually make sujood tilawa even during the makruh times. All right?
Yes, thank you.
وإياكم. But good question. Very good question. Love the tentative listening. Okay, let's move on, inshallah. In general, of course, التطوع المطلق. What does it mean to have a التطوع المطلق? Basically, all the different non-regular voluntary prayers. So whether we're speaking about perhaps during the nighttime, we're doing qiyam al-layl, and possibly, you know, those general rak'ahs that 2 rak'ahs that you might be doing. Here it is. Okay, let's see. Or here and there. The different scholars that narrated in the Sunan. Okay, let me just clarify what's the difference between the books that are considered as Sunan and the books that are considered Musnad and probably Jami'. Oh, just really quick, those different classified types of books of hadith. The books that are considered, like, let's say Sunan Abu Dawud, Sunan, well, Tirmidhi is not actually Sunan, it's actually Jami', but it's very commonly known as Sunan Tirmidhi, but it's actually Jami'. Okay, Sunan Ibn Majah, etc. Now, the books of Sunan are classified based on the chapters of fiqh, meaning the chapters of legislation. So you would have the first chapter basically being Kitab al-Tahara, the Tahara chapter, the second chapter would be Salat, the third chapter would be Zakah, Siyam, etc. Okay, those would be Sunan. But the Jawami', just like Jami' al-Bukhari, if you look at, for example, Sahih al-Bukhari, it basically starts out with Kitab al-Wahi. Starts out with Kitab al-Wahi, the way that the Wahi had started, and then basically all the different ahadith that relate to the different topics that are more centered around Islam. And of course, some of it would also be centered around legislation as well, but it's different. So in the Sunan, you would not have the ahadith that relate to signs of Judgment Day, for example, but you would have that in al-Jawami'. Okay, you would have that in al-Jawami'. Okay, let's continue right there. So they had narrated this hadith that the Prophet ﷺ was asked, أي الصلاة أفضل? What is the best prayer that we could perform after الصلاة المكتوبة, after the obligatory prayer? And he said, الصلاة في جوف الليل. It's the prayer that you would do during the night. That's the best prayer after Salat al-Maktuba. What does that mean? The obligatory prayers are the most important prayers that you could pray. Even all the Qiyam al-Layl is not equivalent to Salat al-Duhr. Even all Qiyam al-Layl is not equivalent to any of the 5 obligatory prayers. Obligatory prayers, they hold the highest level of obligation, the highest level of reward. Okay, let's see. The Prophet ﷺ also narrated, إن في الليل لساعة لا يوافقها رجل مسلم يسأل الله خيرا من أمر الدنيا والآخرة إلا أعطاه إياه وذلك كل ليلة. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ said there is an hour in the night that during the night which no Muslim person would ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for any good in this world and the hereafter, but Allah will grant it to him. And that applies to every night. So this hadith is basically telling us there, for those that are probably struggling, hey, there's a certain hour. When you say a certain hour, does that necessarily mean 60 minutes per se? No, it doesn't mean. And the hour in the hadith, the hour in Lugha Arabiya does not necessarily mean 60 minutes per se, but it basically means a certain timing, a certain amount of timing. Can be 15 minutes, can be 20 minutes, can be 30. Who knows what the amount of time is. But if a person basically happens to come across that time and actually pray, make dua during that time, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically answer their dua. And this is basically upon every night. So this isn't one specific night, probably during maybe Ramadan or anything like that. Every single night, there's this hour. There's this very special hour. The Prophet ﷺ, The Prophet ﷺ had also said, عليكم بقيام الليل فإنه دأب الصالحين قبلكم وهو قربة لكم إلى ربكم ومكفرة للسيئات ومنهاة عن الإثم. The Prophet ﷺ had said, adhere to the night vigil, supererogatory prayer, for it is the habit of the righteous people before you. Verily, the night, the vigil night, basically, the vigil's voluntary prayer is basically a means of nearness to Allah and the way by which sins are removed and one stops committing sins. So what does that mean? Hold on. So the Prophet ﷺ is ordering us to do Qiyam al-Layl. Is that like an order or is this a recommendation? No, this is a recommendation, not an order. Why? Because what it says alaykum, that's giving us this commandment. Why did you, and how did you say that it wasn't obligatory? It's not obligatory because of the hadith that man comes to the Prophet ﷺ and starts asking the Prophet ﷺ, what are the different commandments that I have to do? And he said the 5 daily prayers. And then he asked, هل علي غيرها? Is there anything else that I have to do? And he said, لا إلا أن تطوع. After the Prophet ﷺ had told him that the only commandments in regards to prayer that he's obligated to do are basically the 5 daily prayers, and that he is not commanded to do anything more unless it was a voluntary thing. So along with this hadith, that would let us know that this isn't necessarily an obligation, but this is a recommendation. So this recommendation is trying to recommend it to us for what reason? Well, the Prophet ﷺ said, فَإِنَّهُ دَأْبُ الصَّالِحِينَ قَبْلَكُمْ, because the highly righteous people, like the really good people, the people that are highest level of righteousness, they would be the ones to basically engage in that and take it as something that they would embrace and be consistent in doing. And it gets you closer to your Lord Almighty, and it basically removes the sins, and it would encourage you to keep away from different sins. In other words, what happens? It has this power to empower you to overcome the different things that might actually get you attracted to sin. That's Qiyam al-Layl. Wow. What a power. It has the power to keep you stronger in faith. Let's say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a number of different ayat, he basically had praised those that would do Qiyam al-Layl. Let's look at Surah Al-Dhariyat. That's probably one of my favorite ayat in regards to Qiyam al-Layl. إِنَّهُمْ كَانُوا قَبْلَ ذَلِكَ مُحْسِنِينَ. They were muhsinin. So wait a minute. This ayah was actually preceded by the different ayat that related to why some people were entitled to Jannah. And then this comes in as a response that what they were living in is that they were muhsinin. Now, al-muhsin is actually the highest level of faith, because the lowest level of faith is Muslim. Okay. Then after that is mu'min. And then after that is the highest level is muhsin. Where did we get that from? Remember the hadith, بينما نحن جلوس عند رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذ طلع علينا رجل شديد بياض الثياب شديد سواد الشعر لا يرى عليه أثر السفر ولا يعرفه منا أحد. You really got to memorize that hadith like you would memorize the Quran. That's one of my favorite hadith. What is that hadith saying? That a man comes up, Umar ibn al-Khattab says, a man comes up, very black hair, very white clothes. We didn't know who he was, didn't have any signs of a journey on him, and then just comes in and just sits in front of the Prophet ﷺ, puts his knees right in front of the Prophet ﷺ's knees, and then asks, well, tell me about what is Islam? And then he responds to him, أن تشهد أن لا إله إلا الله, etc. And then he said, صدقت. He said, you're right. And then he asks him about well, the Sahaba said, فَعَجِبْنَا لَهُ يَسْأَلُهُ وَيُصَدِّقُهُ. We were really surprised. How is it and why is it that he would ask him the question and then he would confirm the answer? And then he said, well, tell me about al-Iman. And then he would say, أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه, etc. Okay. And then he would tell me about ihsan. And he said, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه. So then you could see from that hadith, the Prophet ﷺ then explains to Umar ibn Khattab who this random person that just showed up, and definitely not a person that they were familiar with, and not a person that was outside of the country, and in other words, on a journey, etc. And therefore just shows up that was actually Jibril alayhi salam. Okay, let's see. كانوا قليلا من الليل ما يهجعون. They barely slept throughout the night. وبالأسحار هم يستغفرون. And during the time of Sahar, what is a Sahar? A Sahar is basically the time before Fajr. All right, by an hour or an hour and a half, that's the time of Sahar. What would they be doing? Not only are they praying, but they would also do and engage in istighfar. In another surah, in Surah Al-Sajdah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised them and said, تَتَجَافَى جُنُوبُهُمْ عَنِ الْمَضَاجِعِ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا وَمِمَّا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ يُنْفِقُونَ فلا تعلم نفس ما أخفي لهم من قرة أعين جزاء بما كانوا يعملون. الله أكبر. Let's see. What does that mean? Their sides, that is, they arise with their sides, basically doing what? They arise from their beds, then they supplicate to their Lord Almighty in fear and aspiration, and from what we had provided, that is basically their wealth, they would spend, in other words, donate, and no soul knows what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had hidden for them of comfort for their eyes and satisfaction, that is, as reward for what they had done. Ya salam. Ya Allah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us from those فَلَا تَعْلَمُ نَفْسٌ مَا أُخْفِيَ لَهُم مِّن قُرَّةِ أَعْيُنٍ. Well, what does it mean, like مِّن قُرَّةِ أَعْيُن? Like, what do you mean that their eyes are comfortable? How do you make comfortable eyes? Like, what does that even look like? So when you look at happiness, the levels of happiness are, yeah, you're probably happy on the inside. You're feeling okay. Okay, you're not sad. That's the first level. The second level is you're probably giving a smile and your eyes are looking in comfort. Okay, this is the stage you're going, at least in the beginning. Okay, the beginning of happiness. And then the final stage is a smile with a sound. And then the final, well, actually, that's before the final stage, because the final stage would be al-qahqaha. The final stage would be a person laughing with a loud laugh. That would be al-qahqaha. Okay, that would be the final stage of happiness, I guess. Okay, but this ayah is taking us that their happiness, you could even see it in their eyes. They're so content when they would discover that, oh, this is all that I would be rewarded for, all the different things that I had done. And in particular, the sujood at-tilawa, in particular, sujood at-tilawa. And certainly there are a number of different texts that basically talk about the importance of Qiyam al-Layl. Those were just in brief, right? Let's see. So the most important thing and the best thing about Qiyam al-Layl is that you would make it not something that you would tell people about and brag about, because you want to make sure that you are really strong in your sincerity. And that's when most of those times that people are sleeping in and people are certainly preferring the comfort and preferring their cozy beds over their prayer, but you come in preferring your prayer. Now that's why it would basically be, just as you were hiding your Qiyam al-Layl and you would be praying during that night, that's basically what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically hide a lot of different things and keep it for you. So this isn't that keeping it from you, but it is keeping it for you on Judgment Day, for basically for you, for your Jannah. Okay, so there are many different hadith that regards to, like we said, Qiyam al-Layl. And what about Qiyam al-Layl? I mean, are there any times that we're not supposed to be doing Qiyam al-Layl? So basically, throughout the night, Qiyam al-Layl starts from the time after Isha. That's Qiyam al-Layl. Okay? And Qiyam al-Layl is basically better than praying the voluntary prayers throughout the day. Okay? And in fact, the best times of Qiyam al-Layl are the third night after the last third night, that is. So what does it mean, like the third night and the first night? What, or the first half, or etc.? How do you calculate that? You would calculate that based on the timing from Salat al-Isha timing, okay? And then Salat al-Fajr, and then you would basically calculate, okay, let's say 7 hours, 8 hours, etc. And then you would say, okay, here's half the time, here's 1/3 of the time, etc. Here's the last third of the night, etc. That's how you would know it. Okay, let's see, in a hadith that is Sahih, أحب الصلاة إلى الله صلاة داود كان ينام نصف الليل ويقوم ثلثه وينام سدسه. That the best preferred prayers to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically the prayer that Dawood alayhi salam used to do. He used to pray, used to sleep half the night. That doesn't mean midnight. Remember that. Remember, we're going to be doing that calculation. Depending on when Isha starts and then when Fajr would basically start. And then he would do 1/3 of the night, Qiyam al-Layl, and then he would sleep 1/6 of it. Now here's one thing. Not everyone is capable of doing that. We basically vary in the amount of sleep that our body is needing, especially women. We need more sleep time than men. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so ladies, there could be some times, this is not to discourage you from doing Qiyam al-Layl, but this is to say, especially the moms that we need to wake up during the night and need to wake up at many times and etc. And possibly, some women, they're already, they're already tired doing all the different chores at home. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had dismissed you from attending the masjid, then in that situation, you would have to see, are you capable of investing Qiyam al-Layl, even if it's 2 rak'ahs, just do 2 rak'ahs. Even if it's 2 rak'ahs for Qiyam al-Layl, try doing that. If you are capable of doing more, then do more. And it's important to mention, I'm not sure if they had mentioned this hadith, but Sayyida Aisha had mentioned a hadith when she said that the Prophet ﷺ would do Qiyam al-Layl. It would be a quick and a swift Qiyam al-Layl, to the point that she would even question whether he had even recited al-Fatiha or not. So it's really short, barely 3 minutes, barely 4 minutes, just really quick, and that was that Qiyam al-Layl. It doesn't have to be long and very long, etc. Even if it's a 4-minute thing that you would do, that's okay. That's basically better than not doing anything. Okay. And certainly, ladies, try to at least put in those 4 minutes of Qiyam al-Layl, even if it's, those moments that you might wake up. And I would usually say, those times when in the middle of the night, you would feel that, okay, why did I just wake up at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m.? I would say it's probably the malaika wanting you to wake up to just do Qiyam al-Layl. You wake up during that moment, just, make your wudu, do a 2-minute or not 2-minute, but a 4-minute, or, just do rak'ahs and basically go back to sleep. Okay. And let's see, the Prophet ﷺ had mentioned the hadith that during that night, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would come down during that night. How does he come down? That's yaliqu bi jalalihi. How that happens, that's something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be fit for his highness, but that's not something that we would compare to human beings whatsoever. So that's something yaliqu bi jalalihi. And he would ask, is there anybody that is asking for doing an invocation, basically asking for something, whether healing, whether rizq, whether employment, and that I would basically respond it to him, would give it to him, and then they would basically have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responding, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically ask that question, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responding in their dua, basically. Imam Ahmad used to say قيام الليل من المغرب إلى طلوع الفجر. قيام الليل is from Maghrib and not necessarily from Isha. That's basically Imam Ahmad saying it's basically from the start of Maghrib till Fajr. And therefore, you would say that in Nafila is between al-Isha'ain. So basically from al-Isha until Fajr, but delaying Qiyam al-Layl to the end of the night, basically like we're speaking about possibly right before Fajr, that would basically be better. The Prophet the ayah says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ نَاشِئَةَ اللَّيْلِ هِيَ أَشَدُّ وَطْئًا وَأَقْوَمُ قِيلًا. What is nashi'atul layl? It's basically when you would wake up after a sleep and basically you would do your prayer after your sleep. That's basically the strongest in effect, and basically it's having this power to keep you strong in your faith. So how do we do Qiyam al-Layl? So you basically would have the intention that you want to do Qiyam al-Layl. Okay. Do you have to say it verbally? No, you don't say it verbally. The intention's on the inside, basically in your heart. And then you would get up, probably brush your teeth, maybe do siwak, say la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah lahu al-mulk wa lahu al-hamd yuhyi wa yumeet wa huwa ala kulli shay'in qadir alhamdulillah wa subhanallah wa la ilaha illallah wallahu akbar wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Do I have to? The answer is no, but that's basically something that is recommended that you would basically say. Well, so what does that mean anyways? There's no deity but Allah, who has no partner. To him belongs basically the dominion. To him belongs all the praise. He is over all the things, basically. وَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ, omnipotent. Alhamdulillah, all the praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all the greatness, and there's no power and no one compared to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And basically say, Alhamdulillah, الَّذِي أَحْيَانَا بَعْدَمَا أَمَاتَنَا وَإِلَيْهِ النُّشُورُ. And then say, all the praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that had awakened me after my death, and to him my resurrection should be. Oh, alhamdulillah alladhi radda alayya ruhi. Alhamdulillah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted me my soul back and made my body sound and permitted me to mention him. So this is وأذن لي بذكره وعافاني في جسدي وأذن لي بذكره. Okay, so those are sunan of different types of adhkar that you could do. Can I just wake up and just do two rak'ahs? You certainly can. Like, I don't have to say all of this. You certainly can. You could just get up. You don't want to brush your teeth either. That's absolutely fine. You just want to do 2 rak'ahs. That's absolutely fine. I'm really lazy to get up. Can I just say something like this dhikr in bed? It's better than not doing it. Is that considered qiyam al-layl? No, but it is considered part of istighfar. It is considered part of dhikr throughout the night that was praised in Surah Dhariyat. So even if you didn't get up, but you managed to just say subhanallah, or maybe you just opened your eyes and it was 3 a.m., but you were too sleepy to get up, and you were like, Allahu Akbar wa la ilaha illallah, and you just fall asleep. There's your dhikr. Boom. right there. That's all you wanted to, that's all you were capable of doing. You just got your reward right there. Just do that. Okay, just do that. If you're capable of saying more, do more. Okay, let's see. The what is liked is that you would wake up and just do 2 rak'ahs. When you say khafifatain, what does it mean that it's khafifa? Khafifa means you're not reading long ayat in it, so you're probably just reading al-Fatiha, and that's basically it. Reading al-Fatiha, doing ruku', doing sujood, that's basically it. Okay, then that would be permissible to actually do. Okay, that would be permissible. All right. Let's see. It is like that one would basically إذا قام أحدكم من الليل. The Prophet ﷺ, had said, if any of you would wake up throughout the night and then let him start with 2 rak'ahs that are not long, بركعتين خفيفتين. Okay. And certainly, Salat al-Layl is mathna. It's basically done in 2 by 2 rak'ahs. So in other words, you don't do it in 4, but you do it by 2s. Okay, what does it mean? So basically 2 rak'ahs and then Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, tashahhud, and then Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Okay, and certainly it's best to make long recitation with long ruku' and sujood, but if you just wanted to do just 2 rak'ahs with short ruku' or sujood, basically barely, and just saying one time Subhana Rabbi al-A'la, one time Subhana Rabbi al-Azim, that's basically permissible too. Okay, it's best if you were to do tahajjud in your own home, and that's something that scholars had agreed on. Was agreed upon between scholars that it's best to do it at home, because the Prophet ﷺ himself used to do qiyam al-layl at home. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Sallu fi buyutikum." He said, pray in your homes. فَإِنَّ خَيْرَ صَلَاةِ الْمَرْءِ فِي بَيْتِهِ إِلَّا الْمَكْتُوبَةِ. For the best of the prayers are basically the prayers that are done at home, except the ones that are obligatory. So why so? Because that's when you are nearest and highest in your sincerity. Okay, and certainly you can pray it sitting down, but praying standing, meaning, of course, for reading and all of that, is basically better, especially if you don't have a reason, unless probably. So what are the reasons that we can sit down in? For a voluntary prayer, you don't have a reason. You don't have to have a reason. Okay. For the voluntary prayer, you don't have to have a reason. You could just sit down. For the non-voluntary prayers, meaning the voluntary prayer, the obligatory prayers, you have to have a reason to sit down. Like what? Like perhaps maybe old age, maybe you're too tired, maybe you're not capable of focusing, maybe you're sick, you're ill, etc. Then in that situation, you could sit down. Okay. So in that situation, of course, that would be for the obligatory prayers. For the non-obligatory prayers, voluntary prayers, that is, you don't have to have a reason. I just feel like sitting down because I just feel more comfortable sitting down. That's absolutely fine. Okay, but it's not the same reward. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever prays standing, and that's best. Whoever prays sitting down, then they would get half the reward of that person that is standing. Okay, let's see. If a person had the reason, and let's say maybe old age, maybe too tired, etc., then they would basically get the reward, the same reward as a person standing. My mother-in-law, mashallah, she's almost 80 years old, and she still prays standing and does not even sit down. Mashallah. Ya Rabbi. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give her a good health and a long life. Allahumma ameen. Okay, let's see. The Prophet ﷺ quote said, إِذَا مَرِضَ الْعَبْدُ أَوْ سَافَرَ كُتِبَ لَهُ مِثْلُ مَا كَانَ يَعْمَلُ مُقِيمًا صَحِيحًا. If the servant had, let's say, a reason, such as an illness, or probably they were traveling, they would basically, and then of course they couldn't do what they were doing they couldn't do what they were doing before, then in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would consider and basically record for them the deed that they were doing when they were in their healthy situation or even resident. So what does that look like? So let's say that you were doing Qiyam al-Layl almost every single day, okay? And one day you got a really bad flu, okay? On that day that you really got a bad flu and you weren't capable of doing Qiyam al-Layl, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would consider that as if you had done Qiyam al-Layl because you weren't capable of doing it due to your illness. Okay? Why? Because you were consistent when you were healthy or when you were a resident. When you were a resident, what does that even mean? So let's say when you were a resident every single day, if it's a man, okay? Maybe I should give an example on a woman. Okay, if it's a man basically going every single day between Maghrib and Isha, going to the masjid, for example, okay? And let's say one day you were traveling, okay? That day that you couldn't go to the masjid, okay, because you were traveling, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give you the reward and consider that you basically would get the reward as if you were a resident and that as if you were basically going to Maghrib and Isha. Let's say for a woman, okay? Let's say for a woman, she was consistent in Qiyam al-Layl, okay? But then on those days that she basically has her period, she wasn't capable of doing Qiyam al-Layl. Those days that she had a reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would still consider that she was doing Qiyam al-Layl even though she had her period and certainly was not doing Qiyam al-Layl. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because she was consistent at other times, she would be considered as she was doing Qiyam al-Layl even though she had her period. Okay, let's see. In general, you could actually do the voluntary prayers sitting down even if you had the ability to stand up for the voluntary prayers. Okay, and that's unanimously agreed upon between scholars. Okay, what is like that you would do in regards to the prayers and how we would line them up? What is like is that you would do al-witr to be in the last prayer. Okay, that would be what was recommended, that you would do witr to be in the last prayer. But if you basically had done witr already, that doesn't mean you can't do qiyam al-layl. You could still do qiyam al-layl, but it is recommended that you would delay witr. Okay, there are some scholars that said, some scholars, not all, they said that in order to make the witr become even, you would just, let's say you prayed 3 rak'ahs witr, and then you would just pray another rak'ah, making your witr be even. That's not necessarily something that all scholars agreed on, but it's a considerable opinion. Okay, if a person had missed Qiyam al-Layl, then it is liked and they can make it up. You mean make up Qiyam al-Layl? Yeah, you can make up Qiyam al-Layl and possibly like before Duhur. And let's see, where's that from? I mean, how did you get that? The Prophet ﷺ said, من نام عن حزبه أو عن شيء منه فقرأه ما بين صلاة الفجر وصلاة الظهر كتب له كأنما قرأه من الليل. Whoever is overpowered by sleep and misses the regular portion of their prayer and he performs it in the period between Fajr prayer and Dhuhr prayer, it will be recorded for him as reciting it during the night. So the makeup time is basically at that time. Okay, the makeup time would be, so basically around the duha time. Okay, that would be that time that you can make it up. And is it necessarily somebody that was consistent of Qiyam al-Layl, or is it anybody? I really wanted to do Qiyam al-Layl, but I overslept. You can make it up during that time, basically between Fajr and not during the time that is makruh, but between Fajr and basically az-zawal, between Fajr and Dhuhr, or at least before that time when that sun is in the middle of the sky. So that's when you could do it in. So this is it, and subhanakallah bihamdik nastaghfiruka wa atubu. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I could see something in the chat. Oh, that was Aminata, who wanted to go and tell and basically tattletale on me for cheating on my art. Okay. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to hear, inshallah. Or even somebody telling me you were late to class. Yeah, I know. Inshallah, I promise to be better and inshallah more consistent all the timing, inshallah. Any questions? Guess no one wants to be